Hello and welcome. I'm a storyteller, and this is part 2 of a world building project entitled The World of Atlantica. Today's episode is going to focus on 5 more NPCs that populate Atlantica. We're going to be talking about some of the ancient elves that live there that we built using the Pathfinder 2nd edition rules. Now, there's going to be a couple of classes for old school essentials based on these NPCs, but we're going to save that for next episode. In addition, in that episode, we were going to talk about the 2 more really lovingly crafted hex maps that are going to be available. And you can download all of that at the World of Atlantica Discord channel, which is linked below. The files will be in the PDF format. Now, at any rate, for a very brief history of Atlantica. Now, all of the world's, or nearly all of the world's inhabitants, believe that the gods created the Mar itself. And then, after that, that they created the lands and waters upon which rest on the Mar. And this isn't really true. The gods found the Mar. They found it, took power from it, built upon it, exploited it. Although it's not really fair to say they did all of this entirely by themselves. They brought the giants, the OGs, the original giants, to the Mar to do most of this labor for them. The gods did make elves and men and orcs and many other peoples, and nearly all of those peoples now believe that the original giants became jealous of the gods' creations, and as a result they warred upon the gods. This isn't entirely true. The giants learned a lot from the gods, and they created their own peoples, kingdoms of giants, who ruled vast lands, their subjects made of orcs and elves and men and marfolk. The gods actually grew envious of the giants. They decided to unleash elder dragons on the world, and that ancient world came to an end. Because the dragons destroyed nearly everything. Giants, mortals, even gods themselves. Because like the gods and the giants before them, the dragons had incredible magic power. They could create. But they filled the world with monsters, and they and those monsters ruled for millennia. Now, with that said, even dragons can be killed, and after several millennia, some of the elder dragons had gone to sleep, some were dead, and in their absence, the small mortal peoples of Atlantica began to flourish. Now, the elder dragons had been granted vast power by the gods. They slew the original giants and many of the gods themselves with that power. It was a war so great that civilization only returned very slowly. But from the ashes of that apocalypse, an elf empire slowly rose. Across a world full of monsters and ruin, it grew and flourished and stretched across much of Atlantica. With that said, for the other peoples of Atlantica, the rise of the elf empire was a bit complicated, to say the least. Orcs, men, and marfolk, and a lot of other people were subjugated by the elves. They didn't truly flourish as the elves did. But the elves did give their gifts, and amongst those gifts was a calendar. That calendar begins with the coronation of the first elf emperor, and thus the elves brought the world of Atlantica out of the age of myth and into an age of history. Now, for over 2,000 years, that empire grew, and as it did, more and more of the empire's army had to consist not of elves, but rather of men, orcs, marfolk, and others. Ultimately, it was these mercenary armies who proved to be the empire's downfall. A lot of them no longer wished to serve their elf masters, and instead turned on them to punish them for their cruelties. A rebellion began by a marfolk army when they felt they were being mistreated. And that rebellion started a greater war, because the elves responded to the rebellion of the marfolk by destroying their holy temple, Mazuma's House of Lights. the temple at the capital of the homeland of the Marfolk on Qualbacaria. This was little more than attempted genocide, but it did not lead to its intended results, or what the elves intended the results to be. Instead of submitting to elf authority, the Marfolk took their fleet and landed an army in South Calamar near the elf capital. That fleet then proceeded to destroy the western navy of the elf empire, and the army which had landed there conducted the last march of the Marfolk army, which consisted of them rallying with a string of victories that basically served to cut the elf capital off from communications, non-magical communications anyway, with most of the rest of the empire. These victories, and even more so, the chaos that followed from the cutting off of trade and communications with the capital, induced a lot of other mercenary generals to join the rebellion. A lot of these mercenary generals were humans and orcs, and they began to carve out chunks of the elf empire out as their own personal fiefdoms. The war continued, and once again, basically, apocalyptic magics were unleashed upon Atlantica. The necromancer rose during this time. He conquered nearly half of the elf empire, and then the Orc Alliance took the elf capital and renamed it Elfra, and just like that, the elf empire was gone forever. Vast numbers of elves were killed as afterwards, and only perhaps in some far-flung parts of the empire did elves retain any control. And once again, without the empire there, much of Atlantica was plunged into a dark age, for in the absence of the order of the empire, monsters once again stalked the land in great number. Now, in the timeline that we're talking about, it's been 725 years since the fall of the capital of the Elf Empire, and like I said, that city, now known as Elfra, exists as a small city-state with pretty great power. It's the holy capital of Elamush, the Orc god. From there, the high priest of the Orcs, known as the Great Eye, exhibits great influence and power across basically all of the continent of Icaria, and in a lot of the parts of a lot of the islands of the Infinite Isles of the Ixothar Sea. At any rate, it is the year in the elf count. It is the year 3482, and that calendar is still in use by most people of Atlantica, even though very few elves live today. But before the empire fell, there were researchers in that elf empire who began to discover some of the secrets of magic and creation, the same powerful magics that were wielded by the gods and the great giants of the Age of Myth, the same as the elder dragons who destroyed that age. And in the present era, much of that knowledge discovered by the elf empire is lost, just as that of the gods and giants thousands of years prior was lost. But some does remain. One figure of repute in the modern era is known only as Mother Belrios. Mother Belrios is an arcane researcher, hundreds of years old, who long ago made a pact with a powerful being from the Undermar. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition rules, she's a summoner with a fire eidolon companion. Now, she incidentally, in her youth, discovered that her children were blessed with the same abilities she was. That's to say, they got a fire elemental companion as they grew older. And she decided to dedicate her life into building one of the most powerful families in the world, and as a result, in her hundreds of years, she has mothered just over 100 children. Now, Mother Belrios and her clan really survived the conquests of the Necromancer, and ultimately were offered an alliance with the forces of the Necromancer as an acknowledgement of her power. So unlike most of the elves, she remains. Today, her tower, which sits outside of Emporium Thanos, is full at any given time of not just her, but dozens of her children, and it sits as one of the great towers outside of the city. Now, the legend of the first necromancer was that he got his power as a result of actions taken by the Elf Empire. That first necromancer was a merchant who traded often with the Marfolk. And when the Marfolk Rebellion started and he continued to trade with them, eventually a local elf magistrate found out, who proceeded to send soldiers after the merchant. Now, the merchant saw the soldiers coming and hid in a great tree by the Mar. And that tree had a great hole in its trunk, which was filled with strange mushrooms. And he hid in that hole for an entire fortnight. He had brought with him nothing to eat or drink, but the tree sustained him by he ate those mushrooms. And the soldiers outside couldn't find him. But when he finally came from the tree, he shortly thereafter discovered that he had the powers of the necromancer. He had been a merchant and a wizard previously, a wizard with disciples. And those disciples also became powerful necromancers, and after that, they went out and conquered much of the Elf Empire. Now, unlike many legends told by the peoples of Atlantica, this one is true. That is how the original necromancer got power and how an empire, a new empire, began to form. Now, a small part of that legend actually involves one of the elf captains who was tasked with finding that merchant. When he did eventually find that merchant, he instead betrayed the dying elf empire and joined the forces of the necromancer. His name is Phildorus Orpheus. He, like Mother Belrios, also has a tower not far outside of Emporium Thanos, and he's built as a witch in the Pathfinder 2nd Edition rules, though the eventual release of a new necromancer class means that I think we're going to eventually completely rebuild him, but either way, you'll find his spell selection heavily favors an undead theme. Now, another elf who survived to this day is named Valthor Orpheus, who is the master of the Sanctum of Clouds and Feathers, a monastery of monks. And Valthor is a monk of incredible power. He, long ago, wandered in solitude. One day, while exploring some mountains, he encountered 3 feathered asps, powerful dragons who dwelled deep in the mountains of Calabar. Valthor debated his philosophies about discipline and honor to these chaotic beings, and after many years of debate, taught the dragons much about his philosophies and his meditations, and this helped those dragons quell their inner rage, and that gave them far greater control over their own lives, they discovered. Now, in return, the 3 feathered asps taught Valthor much about the magic of dragons. Like I said, Valthor Orpheus is a high-level monk for Pathfinder, and he is the master of the Sanctum of Winds and Feathers, where his students train. Now, our last 2 NPCs that we're going to talk about today are named Sherace, or Barngios, and Elthia Alsalvios. Sherace is a paladin, and Elthia is a druid in the Pathfinder rules. They live in secret in the Forest of Shadows, specifically in a swamp at the Forest of Shadows, which lies just north of the Great Mountains of Calamar. In that forest, near the base of the mountain, the swamp is there, and that serves as Elthia's druid grove. The 2 live there in secret because they don't really hail from Icaria. Back when the Elf Empire first began to crumble, a faction of elves, now known as the Druids, left to the new lands they were creating far to the west. They had discovered some of the power that the giants of old that the gods knew, and they wanted to create a new paradise, and they set about to do that. But in the last 100 years, they have returned to the other parts of Atlantica in secret, sending agents like Sherace and Elthia to Icaria and beyond to keep an eye on the growing power of these new empires, the orcs, the necromancers, fearful that they might try to explore the Mar and find the sacred lands of the Druids. And they certainly want to keep that from happening, or at least know about it before it happens. At any rate, so they are secretly working and spying against the Orc Kings and the Necromancer. At any rate, I think that's all for today. Thank you for tuning in. You can find, like I said, all of these NPCs and a bunch of other stuff at the World of Atlantica Discord linked below as free PDFs. If you like this content, please like and subscribe, and be on the lookout for our next video, which are going to cover 2 new classes for Old School Essentials, the Child of Belrios and the Student of the Three Feathers, as well as 2 new Hex maps. Anyway, until next time, peace.